I'm Donna Lampkin-Stevens, and we're back on Spotlight, where we feature the University of Central Arkansas's College of Fine Arts and Communication. Thanks for joining us. My friend and colleague Mike Gunter, Assistant Professor of Digital Filmmaking, joins me today to talk about his film Chutes and Gates, among other things. So join us when we return.
At the University of Central Arkansas, I live in the only residential college in the country focused on entrepreneurship and innovation. I've had the opportunity to develop mobile apps for local businesses. And I've been able to do everything from intramural sports to campus radio.
It is my college. So.
UCA put me and my education front and center. Learn how at uca.edu.
Joining me now is Mike Gunter, Assistant Professor of Digital Filmmaking. And Mike, it's been too long. Welcome back to Spotlight.
Thank you very much.
Well, let's get started with your background. I know you've been on before to talk about various projects, but we haven't really talked about you. So where'd you grow up? Where are you from?
Primarily in St. Louis. I was born in Kansas City and lived a few years in Michigan, but I spent most of my formative years in St. Louis and went to school at Missouri State, what's now Missouri State in Springfield, Missouri.
To study?
Initially to study forestry.
Really? I didn't know that.
And then business, okay. and then
one
communication.
Of those.
Yeah, one of those. So I went into electronic media,
okay.
radio, television, film. That was my degree, my undergraduate degree.
What did you intend to do then?
Initially I was wanting to work at a television station, and I moved back to St. Louis, and I did go to work for an independent affiliate there, and worked there for about a year.
And what did you do?
I was in the mailroom, and I
started
at the bottom,
good,
and worked my way up into just some basic video production. And then there was an opening at a company called Swank Audiovisuals and Motion Pictures.
Still in St. Louis?
Yeah, still in St. Louis. And they did hotel and conference meetings, conventions, the audio and video work for that company. I worked there for 6 years, and decided to go back to graduate school in
why?
film.
At that point, you've had a nice career?
Yeah, I'd been doing production, but I had an interest in doing narrative work, and most of the work I was doing were conferences and meetings and that
no
sort
creativity.
of thing. Well, yeah, they were creative positions, but they didn't allow for me to write scripts and kind of pursue my area of interest. So, and I was also I was doing a lot of training for other employees at Swank, and I kind of likened it to teaching, and I thought I'd go back to get a degree and teach in film programs, film studies, film production programs.
So where did you decide to do your graduate work?
Went to the University of Kansas, and so at the age of 30, I went back to grad school, went to the University of Kansas.
Don't you think that's great? Because I tell my students, go out and work, and then when you decide to go back, you've changed.
Yeah, I think there's a slightly different approach to academia at that point, coming from the outside, and that was one of the things. Talking to my faculty, I mean, they were sort of taking a risk, if you will, at someone my age who hadn't been studying film or looking into that area of research for a number of years. I had the production skills and background certainly, but not from the history and theory kind of point of view.
So you just up and quit your job?
I quit my job, and I went to Kansas, and I was there for 6 years. I initially went in as a MA PhD track. A year and a half into my master's program, I took a job as the building manager, the facilities manager. They did not have someone in that position prior to that, and so I became responsible for the production studios and facilities and inventory and all of that. And spent a few years doing that, ended up just getting my master's degree while I was there. And then my mentor at Kansas was Dr. Joe Anderson, who was our former chair here at this department. And Joe went to Georgia State University in Atlanta. And about a year or so later, he recruited me to come to Georgia State. He said they have a lot of money, a pile of equipment, and they need somebody to do something with it. So, and then literally there was a pile of equipment when I arrived, and they had a studio, and there was a mountain of cases. They had spent like $1 million the year before, bought all this stuff, and had no one to install it and outfit the program. So I spent 4 years in Atlanta at Georgia State, and enjoyed that experience. Had a lot of great opportunities.
And you were did you teach a lot there, or what?
I was a position they called an academic professional.
Okay.
I taught 2 classes a semester, and I managed the production facility. I was the director of production there, at what we called the Digital Arts and Entertainment Lab. And so I was teaching there. At Kansas, I did some student teaching and kind of worked with faculty very closely in the production program, providing the resources that they needed. But I was officially teaching at Georgia State for 4 years. At the time, we were developing an MFA program at Georgia State, and I was interested in getting my MFA. And if I had stayed there, I probably would have enrolled in that MFA program. But Dr. Anderson moved to Conway, Arkansas, and University of Central Arkansas, and began to call me and say, "I found a better place for you. Come
so
here."
he was here how long before you came?
He was here a year before
Okay.
I was recruited.
And
I
you got
came,
here when? What year?
summer of 2003.
Okay.
And came into the program as a lecturer and facilities manager. So I was a half-time faculty, half-time staff, and I managed
Essentially what you did at
what
Georgia
I did
State.
at Georgia State, correctly, yeah, and at Kansas as well. So I was in that position for a few years, and then finally my position was converted to tenure track. So I'm in going up for tenure next year, and teaching a full load since I converted over to tenure track. So that's been it's been interesting.
So how did you become interested originally in filmmaking? I mean, when you were an undergrad, were you just
Yes, I think I always had an interest in film. I would love going to the movies, talking about films. I don't know why I said I was a forestry major when I went to school, but I did. Maybe I wanted to live out in the forest and do that work. But I always had a passion for film and an interest in that. And when I was at Missouri State, we had a nice film program that was part of the Department of Communication. And I just wanted to be closer to that. Learn how to tell my own stories, and in addition to watching films and appreciating films in that fashion. So I started pursuing those types of classes and a lot of the history classes. They didn't have as much production at Missouri State at that time. And then I had a chance to sort of hone my production skills in St. Louis when I was working for Swank Audiovisuals, and got very familiar with cameras and editing systems and that sort of thing.
So where did you first begin to make films? At Kansas, I guess? Or?
Yeah, I was involved in making films, but I found that I didn't have an opportunity to, when I was a student, a graduate student at Kansas, I had an opportunity to make several films. When I went to Georgia State, my assignments and duties were such that I really didn't have a creative outlet of my own. I worked closely with a lot of students and helped them make their projects. I assisted other faculty, but sort of my time and energies were sort of devoted to that, and rather than finding the opportunity to continue to make my own work, my own films, write my own scripts, and follow through with those in production and distribution. And coming here initially gave me a little bit of a creative outlet, and then we at UCA, the film program, the Department of Mass Communication and Theater, put together the MFA program in digital filmmaking. And I'd been interested in that at Georgia State, and was again interested in it there, both from a career perspective, but also just to get myself back into that sort of place for creative work. So I enrolled in our MFA program when I was here.
The first class, right?
The first class, yeah, I think I was one of three.
Okay.
And
when you came here, you didn't even think this was a possibility, or did you think maybe long term?
We hadn't. There'd been no discussion about an MFA program. Dr. Anderson was interested in that. Dr. Hutchinson, on our one of my colleagues here in the Department of Mass Communication, was very interested in that. We had the faculty, we had the resources. And it was sort of the next step that our program could take. And so it was nice being sort of a guinea pig to sort out the kinks in that process. But it was rewarding, and it allowed me to make, again, focus on creative work and do that in addition to my normal day-to-day duties.
So is it fair to say that you've really sort of become a filmmaker, more of a filmmaker since you've been here? Because you have more time and opportunity, I guess.
Yeah, I've had more direct experience either working on other people's films or working on my own films in the the 10 years that I've been at UCA than I've had at previous institutions. So.
Okay, now you've worked on a ton of films. Tell us about some that you worked on that were not yours, but you were the director of photography or something, because I know you've done lots of that stuff.
Yeah, several years ago, Kevin Clark, a local filmmaker, had approached Joe Anderson about a documentary he had in mind about doing the history of the Arkansas Democrat-Gazette, and the history of the Gazette and the Democrat, and then how that merger formed. And I was connected through him, through Dr. Anderson, and offered up my services as a director of photography. And Kevin had been shooting a number of things himself. He's a great photographer in his own right. So it was just a way for our department to participate in that, to find grant funds to support that project. And I know you came on board with that project in research and kind of helping with the interviews. So I worked with Kevin closely. You and I went on some interviews by ourselves, and then I went on interviews.
Jim Johnson, as I recall, we got to interview him. That was interesting.
And then I went on other shoots with Kevin and operated camera for him on a number of things. So that was a feature-length documentary project and a really rewarding experience. And then my colleague here at UCA, Joe Dull, had written and was going to direct a feature film, our first university sort of feature film coming out of our program. And Joe asked me to be the director of photography on that film, and that was Table at Luigi's. And so we shot that during the summer as part of a class, and we got our students directly involved with that. So I worked as director of photography on that film, and then Joe wrote another film that I shot for him. That was a year and a half ago. We shot that, Sympathy Pains. And so he's been having festival screenings, and we premiered it here at UCA and got a great response. So it's been enjoyable to work in that capacity on those films that I can try to bring the director's vision to life.
Now you've also directed several of your own. So tell us about some of those, and we're going to get more into some of those shortly.
When I as an MFA student in the MFA program, I directed a couple of films. I wrote and directed a couple of films. One was a short, and one was my thesis project. The short was a film called The Cleaner, and part of it was in response to my students. The feedback I was getting from my students in my introductory production class was that somehow the equipment we had was limiting, that we didn't have all the best equipment and the newest equipment, and therefore their films suffered because of it. So I took it as a challenge to try to shoot a film using just our cameras and our sound equipment and limited lighting, and find a way to creatively tell a good story using the same technology that our students were using. And so that was one of the approaches. Another approach was I was in a class with Dr. Hutchinson that we were doing sort of micro budget or micro shorts, very short films, short shorts. And this film ended up being 3 minutes in length. And it came to me one day. We had a custodian working here in the building in Stanley Russ for a number of years named Jeff McLean. And Jeff came to my office and reached down to pick up my trash can, and at the same time I was throwing a wadded up ball of paper, and it bounced off his chest and into the wastebasket. And so I thought,
that's where it came from.
Somehow there could be a story here. I don't know what. So the janitor's cleaning up the building, and what sort of things might he find? And I wrote a little short story around that and asked Jeff if he would, he was a great looking character. Walrus mustache and tattoos on his arms, and so I asked him if he'd be willing to participate, and we shot it over the course.
What was his reaction? Did he think you were crazy?
Yeah, he thought we were, a little strange that we'd want to shoot him, and I gave him the basic action and showed him the script. It had no lines of dialogue for him. There was one other character that would have a couple of lines of dialogue, but otherwise I would just ask Jeff to move about the building and do what he normally does. So we shot it over the course of 2 afternoons just with Jeff's availability. Shot it here in the building, didn't leave the building, used one light in addition to the resources that were already in place, and shot it with the camera and everything that our students use. And I've used it as an example in my class over the years. I've been able to use it as a 3 minute short narrative with limited dialogue, and it's kind of held up fairly well. It did well at a number of festivals. I screened it premiered it at Little Rock. It screened at Indie Memphis, and a few other festivals, Ozark Foothills Film Festival. So for a little 3-minute short, it made the rounds.
I love The Cleaner, and we are going to have a chance to watch it right now.
Now I gotta wonder what they're giving you, but I'm not, because I'm giving you everything here. Of course, no problem. Hold up there, Chief. Yes!
We're back again with Mike Gunter, who has very interesting stories. So Mike, tell us a little bit, you were working on your MFA while you were a faculty member here. How was it being a student and a teacher?
It was a challenge. It was
Took
a challenge.
you 3 years?
Yeah. I had some of the work that I did for my master's degree. Some of the coursework that I did was able to transfer over.
Okay.
And then I just had to juggle my work schedule around the class schedules, and did the best we could during those periods. But it was some long days and excuse me, long days and long nights up here editing and shooting. I'd come up with an idea as we went through the various classes, and again the program was brand new. We were kind of feeling our way, and having taught before, and Dr. Hutchinson and I were colleagues back at the University of Kansas, so had known each other for a number of years. We were able to sort of give feedback on the program, and they were able to use us as a kind of a guide to how the program should move forward. And the idea was that initially we'd bring in roughly 10 students a year, and it would be a 3-year degree. And in the 3rd year, you would spend that whole year working on your thesis film. And my father-in-law passed away about the time I was working on that script, and I had a friend who had given me a couple of play scripts that he had written, a gentleman by the name of Jim Danick in St. Louis. And one of those plays that he had written was called Memories of Viola, and it was about a woman reflecting on her life, and her husband had died, and she's reflecting on her life and coming to terms with that. And at the same time, my father-in-law passed away, and I saw my mother-in-law and the way she was dealing with his death. And I incorporated a lot of those emotions into that script and kind of rewrote the script and placed it in Arkansas on the banks of the Washita River. And originally it was a farm in Wisconsin, I think the play was based on. So I wrote that script, and that was a 27-minute film.
Our colleague Bob May.
Bob May was in it. Darren White and Jody Riho were my 3 principals, and we shot at Dr. Joe Anderson's house on the banks of the Washita River and down in Mount Ida. and gave it a beautiful, setting for the shoot. And we shot it over a couple of weekends, and it did really well. My mother-in-law still hasn't seen the film.
Listen, I
mean,
cried. I'm not ashamed to say I cried when I saw it.
Yeah, and it's a little too close, very close to home for her. But again, I started making films here at UCA about the same time that Little Rock Film Festival was getting started, and so again, I was able to get it screened there. And we screened it at a number of festivals again, and had some success with it, and really positive feedback. And it does, it's a pretty emotional, dramatic story. A lot of my stories and film ideas have been comedic to some degree, but
so you're
this one
branching
was,
out,
I'm trying to, and I have a couple of more serious script ideas in mind for future projects.
It's beautiful. Well, speaking of comedic, we get to Chutes and Gates.
Right.
So tell us now, Chutes and Gates won the Best Arkansas Short at the Arkansas, tell me.
Yeah, there's a festival called the Arkansas Shorts Film
okay.
Festival, and it's in its 7th year, and it's held in Hot Springs. It's put on by the Low Key Arts Association, and Bill Solider there in Hot Springs. They also help put on the Valley of the Vapors Independent Music Festival. And the Cleaner played there in their first inaugural. They called me, they'd seen the Cleaner at Little Rock, and they called and wanted to know if they could screen it for their first festival. And so the Cleaner screened there their very first year. And the way they do it is they screen in January, let's say, of 2013, and then at their screening in 2014, they announce the winners for the previous year of the Best Short. And at the time, the Cleaner was one of the nominees for Best Short for the previous year. But it didn't win that year. And then last year, I submitted Chutes and Gates, and it screened in January of 2013. And in November, Bill Solider contacted me and said that Chutes was one of the 3 finalists for Best Film of 2013. And was I planning to be in attendance at this year's festival? I said, well, sure.
At the Arlington in Hot Springs?
Yeah, at the Arlington Hotel, and they've put on a great festival. A few years ago, they were holding it at the Malco Theater in Hot Springs. Last year, they moved to a different facility. I can't recall the name, and this year, they had even more. I think they had over 300 people there, and it's just a one-night screening. They screen about 2.5 hours of short films by Arkansas natives or residents of Arkansas, and they have high school kids who participate as well. So it's really broad spectrum, very professional films as well as sort of educational kind of films generated by various scholastic programs.
And here is
this is
here's your trophy, and it's wonderful.
This is the 7th and final. I think they did a cast of a person's hand holding a camera.
Love it.
And they this was the last one of those. They'd made 7, and this was the last one. And so I went down in January 4th, 2014, and they showed clips from the 3 finalists, and then called Chutes and Gates.
Great.
So I was able to accept that award, and again, it's on behalf of the faculty who contributed to my work and the students who contributed to my work. It's it only makes it possible with their help.
Sure. Well, now we have a clip from Chutes and Gates, but first set it up. What is Chutes and Gates?
It's based on a true story. My parents are both from Iowa. Both my sets of grandparents own farms, and so during the summers, I would often spend the summer on the farm, or at least a few weeks each summer. And one time, I was working with my grandfather, and he asked me to take the temperature of a calf, and hilarity ensued. So this film is based on that experience, and so I took it from that experience, and we got the cooperation of the Arkansas Sheriff's Youth Ranch up in Batesville. They let us come on. We shot there for a weekend. The cattle were very cooperative, and everybody was safe, and nobody was harmed. But yeah, it was a fun story to tell. My idea behind it was I have a longer feature idea that this was one small part of, and hopefully I can realize that in the next couple of years. But so it was a fun film to make, interesting film to make, and the visual effects are very important to it as well.
Well, here's a short clip from Chutes and Gates.
You take her temperature while I get these shots ready. What are you doing up here? Going back. Round back.
Wow, Mike. What a clip. Now, you've said that the audiences at the various festivals have laughed at all the right places, and they've gone yuck at all the right places.
Yeah,
How do you get them to do that?
Well, I mean, it's interesting. You try to build in some of those moments of action, some of the lines of dialogue, and once the audience realizes where the film is going, I think they're surprised when I show what I show. But the crowd does react strongly to it, very vocally. I've had a great reception when I played at Little Rock and the other festivals that I've attended, and with it. But just having that strong reaction, I tried to build in the physical comedy as well as some of the dialogue. I'm always surprised. I expected, there's moments where you expect to have a stronger reaction, and it might be different than you expected. But it's great to see it with a large crowd.
Oh, I bet.
Because there's a lot of hoots and hollers as it progresses. So.
Now, where all has it screened?
It premiered again at Little Rock Film Festival. 2013.
2013.
And here regionally, Ozark Foothills, the Offshoots Film Festival, Arkansas Shorts. It played at Bare Bones in Muskogee, Oklahoma. It played at Sacramento Film Festival in Sacramento, California. And it also played at the Ohio State Fair. I'd heard that they had a film competition. I submitted it into that, and it was awarded Best of Show and had a $1,000 gift as a result of that. So that was really wonderful. I've enjoyed getting it out. I wasn't able to attend some of the screenings, obviously, for travel arrangements, but it's been great getting the reaction here regionally as I've been able to attend.
So what's the most difficult part what do you find to be the most difficult part of making a film?
Just the logistics of getting everyone together, pooling all the resources, securing the locations. Once you're on location and you've worked out all the kinks and your cast and crew are there and ready to roll, that's a great time. And then the editing process may take some time to finish, but that's a very rewarding. But the overall pre-production, where you're just trying to pool all the resources together, lock down locations and cast and crew, and get that army marching. Once you start moving, it's fine. But it's just getting everything together.
Do some parts come easier for you than others, like writing or editing? What's the easiest part for you?
I think I enjoy writing and editing. I mean, sometimes directing, I may get distracted with technical issues and not be able to spend enough time with my cast. And as a director of photography on some projects, and then as a writer-director and director of photography on others, I see the benefit of having other people in those crew positions so that I can be freed up to work with my cast more closely.
What's your favorite part of being a filmmaker?
The camaraderie. I mean, the ability to tell stories, but also that group effort in making projects is really rewarding, to have all those people together and resources. So.
All right. Well, Mike, thanks so much for joining us today, and we'll do it again when we have another award or another film.
Great,
so,
thanks.
Spotlight will be back in a moment.
At the University of Central Arkansas, I've encountered world-changing academics and game-changing athletics, helping me become a regular on the Southland Conference Honor Roll. I was able to graduate early with a business degree, and now I'm seeking a second degree in physical education, all while playing Division I volleyball, softball, and soccer. UCA put me and my education front and center. Learn how at uca.edu.
For more information about the programs and people featured on the show, call the College of Fine Arts and Communication at 501-450-3293 or check out our website, www.uca.edu/CFAC, and be sure to like us on Facebook. I'll be back again next time on Spotlight, so please join me then.